Okay, isn't it cool that the pastors are using our verses, right? Well, okay, I had this thought. So you answer it for me. Number one, I didn't write it down. We're in the Paideia. This is the Paideia chapter. So Paideia, let's see. Paideia chapter. The Paideia only means one thing in Greek, please. It does not mean discipline. It means to be tutored or training. So every time you see the word discipline, you should cross it out and put training. Now, riddle me this. All right. If you're a translator and you're translating during the Reformation period, remember we got our King James Bible from the Reformation period? We got Luther's Bible from the Reformation period? Why would you want to put discipline in there instead of tutor, instead of training?
Because that was a big part of their faith, their routine.
I don't think so at all. No. Why would I want to put in Romans that you should pay taxes to the government, which is not in there at all? There is no place in the Bible where it tells you to pay taxes to the government. In fact, taxes, it's not even called tax, it's called tribute. And Jesus said you should give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And according to the Bible, we'll find that, matter of fact, there's a quote in Hebrews that we'll see from Haggai, that all the gold and silver in the world belong to God. So Jesus told us not to pay tribute to Caesar. So why would you put in the Bible that you should pay your taxes to the government?
Politically correct. The government wanted you
to. Who was the government?
They were funding the Bible translators.
Well, not only were they funding the Bible translators, but, today, there in the Constitution, there's no such thing as separation of church and state, That's totally bogus. It is not in the Constitution of the United States. It is in the Constitution of the Soviet Union, but in the United States, we have religious freedom. Not freedom from religion, but religious freedom, which is totally different, misconstrued. But that's not the point. The point is that back in the good old days, right, of Martin Luther and the translators, what was the main... Okay.
Just give it to us.
I just give it to you. This is basic history stuff. This is Western civilization, Western history stuff. This is supposed to be in the prereq, right? This is a prereq to the course. Okay. So here's the king. Where's the church?
Equal.
The king is the head of the church.
Yes. Yes, you got it, brother. Matter of fact, in England today,
The right of kings came from.
The right of kings, the Queen Mother Elizabeth II is the head of the Church of England. And guess what? The Pope used to be under the Medici, under the Italian rule, right? Or under the head. But guess what happened in that period? The church was over the kings. That's what happened to Henry VIII. And the reason Henry VIII brought them out of Catholicism to the Church of England to a degree was to take them out from under the control of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church controlled all. So why would I want... And who were you paying taxes to?
The king.
And the church. Everybody. As a matter of fact, in Germany, when we lived there, they would tithe you. That government would tithe you depending on which church you chose. You could choose between the Lutherans, or the German Lutheran Church, or the Catholic Church. And if you chose to be a member of either of those churches in Germany, and I think it's still true today, they will take 10% out of your income and send it directly to the church.
Yeah, you mark it on your tax.
Even before governments gave taxes, the church was tithing people. So guess what they want to put in those translations? Pay your taxes. Pay your tithe, right? And guess what? What do they want the power to do? To discipline you, right? If I put in discipline in Hebrews, what does that let me do as the church? Well, of course, God's disciplining you because I'm disciplining you. I'm the priest, and I'm going to smack you with a rod and a staff. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, well, that's just God's disciplining you. But that's not what it says. It says training. And this is what we find, okay. And again, people ask me all the time, why don't we change the translations? Why don't we change the translations?
Because you'd never sell a copy of the Bible.
Because you never sell a copy because there's two reasons. Number one, everybody's used to it. And number two, the church has designed a lot of its theology and doctrine based on translations that have been made and the way they've interpreted the translations. So, I guess I'm giving you heresy when I say the Hebrews says that you should train instead of discipline. So I guess maybe I should have a stick, right? And I should discipline you. Oh.
I don't think that's gonna go over very
Well,
well.
we say that, but you say, why would you do this to us? Why would the translators there is no way that I can make Paideia mean discipline. The only way I can do that is I can put it in a context and say, the child, literally, because Paideia comes from a boy child, the child needed extra tutoring, and I decided to beat him until he could spell the words right? And we go, well, that's kind of a throwback, but that's what they used to do. Did you know that? That's what they used to train people, teach people. And again, I go back, I say, remember the training of the Greeks. And I think, most of us today would say, that's probably not very conducive to good learning. Maybe you learn how to spell it, maybe you just get irritated, right? But whatever. I just think it's hilarious that we have a whole chapter that is all about training. And by the way, we just came out of the 11th chapter. The 11th chapter is the pistis, the convince chapter. I'm convinced. If I'm convinced, do I need discipline? No.
Well, we're sinful creatures that don't always
Well, maybe you definitely
do
need
what's
discipline.
right.
If I'm convinced I don't need discipline, I need training, right? Taekwondo. I didn't know you were a number 3 black belt Taekwondo. I thought it was really funny because she said, the things we were talking about, relaxing your arms versus, and she reminded me about the boxing because, the Greeks like boxing. They didn't do it in they didn't have safety gloves. But you can't fight if you got your arms, you can't box if you got your arms down here. I use the example of a bow, which I think is a great one from their military standpoint. But a lot of it, they boxed and they wrestled. And I guarantee you're not going to be, if you're standing like this and a wrestling guy is coming at you, you're dead, you're done. That's all she wrote. You're not going to make it, right? So
I
anyway.
was saying how my students always like to relax their hands. Like they don't want to make tight fists all the time, which is absolutely essential. But I'm always on them, like you have to tight fist, and they don't make them correctly. They put their thumbs up or whatever. I'm constantly correcting them. But you won't be ready to either attack or defend if you don't have, I always tell them the way you practice is the way you're going to do it. So
This is beautiful, see? You see, we have, we should have all gone through a true Greek education. Maybe that's too much to ask, especially in the modern era. A little military training, a little bit of martial arts training, right? A little bit of athletic training, and we get books and education. I mean, this is a positive, right? But do you see this? So we've forgotten our roots, but we have a few people who remember. I fence. I did fencing, so I can tell you all about fencing, but that's late date compared to what we're talking about now, right? But still, the learning or the knowledge would be fundamental to every person in that society. And the minute they mentioned it, everyone would go, I know exactly what they're talking about, right? For us, we have to relearn, refigure all the ideas that we don't know, right? That we've forgotten as a culture. It's like making a fire. How many of you guys can make a 2-foot fire in less than a minute?
Watch Survivor, you learn how to do
You see that? Look, let's do that, right?
or
Right?
if you're in scouts, like
that's one of the things they made us do in my survival training while I was in the military, is they give you like a means to make strike a strike, not a match, but they'd say you have to build a 2-foot fire within, so many minutes, because that's survival, right? Anyway. This is so deep into culture, into what we need to do, and you'll see even more. Anyway, here's the words I got today. We know this word. E-N-E-N. Arena. It's arena. Arena means, somebody say it? Peace. Peace. Whenever we see arena, we know generally that the author is speaking to, to Hebrews and Jews, because the word arena in Greek, and here's the word, okay, so the word literally means to join, and it's translated peace. It's kind of funny, look how the King James gives it to you. One peace, quietness, rest, set aside. The reason they used a little bit of mixed metaphors there is because the word in Hebrew is shalom. Shalom. And shalom literally means the water. When the water is not moving, when the water is like totally placid, that's that word. But in Greek, the word arena means join. So to the Greeks, the word peace means that, okay, Greek mindset, right? So you're an Athenian, you walk in a Spartan bar. Right? Okay, you know what I'm talking about, right? So if the Spartans in the bar don't beat you up, because they are trained properly, then you have arena. Right, exactly. So that's the Greek worldview. On the other hand, the Hebrews, I don't know, maybe it's more contemplative. It is, they're both Oriental societies, but both, kind of contemplative. So anyway, whatever. But this is a word, and remember, just to make it clear, if I'm talking, this is what I was talking to Jews or Hebrews. So what's the word that's used generally if I'm talking to Greeks? Charis, which means grace or graciousness. So charis. And then if I'm talking to Romans in Latin, doxa. Yeah, doxa, which means glory. So, okay, I just throw this out. This is tapping in the theological pool, but isn't it interesting that the writers used verbiage that would be most appropriate to each of the cultures and groups that they were trying to talk to? And so you see, are they super geniuses? I think they're pretty smart. But, and I'll throw this in, so how do we approach different cultures? And that's what Hebrews is all about, right? How do you approach different cultures? Because that's where they are. So let's continue with this. Oh, the other word. The other word is D-I-O-K or C-E-T-E. Diokete. I should probably leave it a K. Diokete. Diokete means to pursue. And look, it says by implication to persecute, but there are other words for persecution in Greek. So it's kind of funny that I always tell you, you got to worry about when they say imply, because, if it's in contextually, maybe it is, but still, there's too much implication going on around here. The Greeks are way too concrete for that, and we'll see an example. So anyway, let's look at, we were at the end of 13. I got to keep this because I got some good stuff here. We had just finished, but I had one thing I had a reference in 13. There's a direct reference in Proverbs 4:26. Proverbs 4:26, and let's see, where should we start? 20. So I'll go Proverbs 4:20. My son, pay attention to what I say. Listen closely to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to a man's whole body. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Put away perversity from your mouth. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Make level paths for your feet and take only ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. Now, the reason I want to point this out is because, so we translated 13, and make rising wheel rut tracks that of your feet, in order that you are not turned away as halt, lame, but more be cured. And so, I just want to note, in Proverbs, does it sound like there's any discipline going on there? That's all training going on there. So I thought that was a really good reference, but I also wanted to mention that I forgot to mention to you, I told you the wheel rut tracks, I think is 4 foot 8 inches. That's the Roman width of a Roman road. It's the width of a Roman cart. It's the width of a standard rail. It is also the width of a standard road in the United States. When we talk about a standard car width of the wheel track, what do you call that? The wheelbase is that, and our roads are based on that. So that is today's standard. So I wanted to re-mention that because I think I forgot about it. In history, you find everything you find that we do, or that's peculiar, right? Maybe you don't think about it, but I think a lot about the different things that we do in our culture and our lives, and I always wonder, why do we do that? Everything has a reason historically, whether you can dig it up or not. Some are easy to find, some are not easy to find. Some are logical and reasonable, some are not as logical and reasonable, but when you know why it's there, then it becomes obvious, and then you go, wow, Shazam, right? That's the world. Anyway, let's go to 14. Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Now, that's a very interesting statement. Let's see what it says. Follow. Didoko. It means pursue. Luckily, they didn't say persecute. Pursue. Pursue peace. Arena. And now we know what arena means within the context of a Greek society. So, arena generally is, okay, a shalom. Can I do anything to make shalom? Can I make water be still?
Maybe make a dam somewhere, but probably not.
You cannot disturb it, unless that would help.
You cannot disturb it. Like I said, an Athenian walks into a Spartan bar. So our authors have told us from the beginning that we should be Athenians going into the Spartan bar, right? But when you're there, you pursue arena. You pursue arena. So in other words, I don't know if that's going to work with Spartans, but you come in, you don't have your fists like this. If you come in like this, they know what you mean, right? Or if you go, ha! You're done. But if you come in and your hands are relaxed, you're probably going to be okay, right? Don't pull your gladius. Just saying. So pursue arena, peace. Amid all, men is added, among all. And Kai, holiness. Hagiosmos, purification. Hagiosmos is a word, hag comes from it. Without a space, choris, it's at a space. I wish I would not simplify some of these really complex words. But remember, choris means like a cliff, like a space in a cliff. Which hosts, it's not no, it's Odysseus. Not even one man is added, but it's implied for the verb. Shall see. Optheomai, to gaze the Lord. It's kurios. Kurios. Usually when they say kurios, it means Jesus. So here's a literal. Pursue peace amid all, and purification at a space which not even one to gaze the Lord, supreme authority. So here's a translation. Pursue peace amid all, purification at a space from which not even one can gaze on the Lord. From which not even one can gaze on the Lord. Pursue peace amid all, and purification at a space from which not even one can gaze on the Lord. In other words, it's not really saying, make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. It's rather saying that if you don't pursue peace, then you can't be purified, and you put yourself at a space from seeing the Lord to seeing God. In other words, the general view of the Hebrew peace is, I walk into the bar and I do what? Nothing. Right? And the authors are saying, if you do that, then you are separating yourself from God. And their example is perfect. What did Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What did Jesus do when he went in? Okay, Jesus walks into a Spartan bar. What did he do? He engaged them. Yeah. That's a beautiful word. He engaged them in conversation. Better yet, Jesus walks into a Sadducee bar or a Pharisee bar, right? And what did he do? He engaged them, and did he always agree with them? No. You know? Yeah, rarely. But the point being that that's how do you pursue peace? A lot of times people think you pursue peace. Well, you definitely don't do it with fists, but guess what? All right. The Rambo technique. I'm not going to suggest you do this, but in the Greek worldview, okay, how do you make friends, do you think, especially among men? What do they do?
Beat each other up.
Yeah. Well, competitions, okay? If you went in and you said, okay, hey, I'd like to be your bud, Dave. Hey, Dave, you want to go? And let's go to the gymnasium, right? And, I got a new javelin. I got a new discus. You want to try them out, right? And of course, in the course of it, you go, hey, you want a round? And so, a little boxing, a little bit of wrestling, and then you go listen to Greek poetry, right? And maybe somebody's twanging on a twang, right? And you're listening to the Greek poetry. That's how they did it. Today, what do? We say, hey, you want to go play golf? Right? I'm engaging. Now that's engaging culturally. So the point is that, to the Greeks, that's the way you engage. Now, if you went to the rabbi or the Pharisee and said, hey, let's go on to the gymnasium, what would he do? Right? Yeah, that's totally opposite, right? Now the Roman guy, hey, let's go to the gymnasium. Yeah, sure, that's great. Do you have a membership? Right? So we look at this culturally, and do you see what the writers are doing? The writers are putting this within a cultural context. Let's go a little bit further and we'll see. I had Psalms 34:14, and I'm going to forget it because some of these, this is not a direct allusion or quote. Let's go to 15. Here's the NIV. See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. All right. Does anybody have a problem with this translation? I mean, just right off the bat, right? See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Is that a Greek statement? Is that concrete?
Well, I'm not sure it's a Jewish statement. I mean, mine says, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God. That defeats, that's opposite of grace.
Well, let's see.
I mean, it's implying that you can do something for grace.
Well, maybe, my thing is, okay, can anyone understand this very well? Does this make sense? Our writers are writing very complex classical Greek, right? And sometimes it's a little bit befuddling, but usually it makes sense and it's concrete. Is this concrete? Does this make sense at all? Well, let's see what it says in the Greek. Looking diligently, it's not looking diligently, it's episkopo, to oversee, lest any, metis, whether any man is added, fail, hustero, to be later, to fall behind. This is a really different translation, right? Hustero means to be later, to literally fall behind. Of, off, the is added, the charis. Okay, charis, I'm talking to Greeks. Charis, graciousness of God, of the God. Lest any, metis, whether any, rhiza, root, pica, poison, acridity, springing, fuo, to puff or blow, to germinate or grow, ano, upward or on top, trouble, in cheleo, to crowd in, u is added, and kai, thereby it's autos, it's dia autos, through itself, many, polis, much, be defiled, to sully or taint. So here's a literal translation. Overseeing whether any to be later, to fall behind, off the graciousness the God, whether any root acridity poison, to puff up or blow, to germinate or grow upward, or on top to crowd in, and through itself much to sully or taint. So let's see what it says in a translation here. Overseeing whether any fall behind from the graciousness of God, whether any acrid root germinates upward, crowding in, and through itself taints much. Okay, there is apparently here a very obvious euphemistic use, or what we would call a figure of speech, right? We're using figures of speech within this context. Now, remember what the context is, right? The context is training, and the context is training to be persuaded, or to persuade others, if you like. So, overseeing, so the previous one was, pursue peace amid all, and purification at a space from which not even one can gaze on the Lord. So basically, pursue peace, in other words, and it used the word arena. So that would be considered a direct address to the Hebrew culture. So the next one says, overseeing whether any fall behind from the graciousness of God, from grace. What is the Greek problem? Somebody said it before. The way you're making friends is similar to what we do. If I say, hey Dave, let's go play golf. Golf is a competition. So if I have, okay, let's say I invite someone, I go into a Spartan bar, and I want to make friends with Spartan guys, right? And I say, hey, let's go out to the gymnasium. If I've got to oversee whether any fall behind from the graciousness of God. In other words, in the Greek society, there's a lot of competition. And the competition is physical as well as in other things, right? Mostly not money-wise, but in, arts and in other things, right? Because the poetry, the symposiums, it's mental and physical. So it's like golf. If I take Dave out and we play golf and I slaughter him, right? And I take him for like $5 a hole, and would he be happy with that? No. It's like if I take a guy to play and I box him and I beat the what out of him, and he's like, okay, is he gonna be happy with me? No. You're not building any kind of happiness here. So you notice what it says: overseeing whether any fall behind from the graciousness of God. In other words, those people that I'm contacting, that I'm pursuing, right? I'm pursuing them for peace. But there's no peace if I am enacting within that culture that way, right? So look at what he's warning. And guess what? This is training. The authors are training, as well as saying you need to train, but they are also at the same time training. Overseeing whether any fall behind from the graces of God, whether, and look what it says, whether any acrid or poisonous root germinates upward, crowding in, and through itself taints much. What are we talking about? What would be that poisonous acrid root?
Some strife that grows up between you and the person you're trying to engage.
Yeah, or even more, the competition itself.
Yeah.
Right? Because the Greek, okay, it's obvious in Shalom, there's not a whole lot of competition. Well, maybe there is. Maybe the rabbis pull off their robes and start duking it out over some, philosophical points. No, I doubt it, right? But in the Greek society is very much competition-based society. And so the root that would get in there is competition. And this is true. Have you ever, you play games with people that are super competitive, and we hope that as people mature, they become less competitive, and then it makes it fun, right? It's fun to go out and play a competitive game where everyone's not cutthroat. I don't think it's ever fun to play cutthroat games, unless you're a professional and maybe they're paying you for it. I mean, to put me through that stress and strain, I hope you're paying me. I'm just saying, the world itself is competitive, and we know that. But if you there are things to be competitive in, and then there are things that you don't have to be competitive in, right? And that's what the authors are trying to tell us or train us in. So,
it's sort of human nature to always be comparing yourself to another person in some way, whether it's wealth or beauty or talent or whatever, to kind of always trying to one-up people or, but those are the things of this world. And God doesn't want us to worry so much about those things.
yeah, and I think, especially if you notice, I think God is really happy with competition. Part of the reason is because, number one, part of our nature is to be competitive. And competitive nature is what drives the ability to fend for yourself and families and everything, right?
Try to get better. I mean,
Well, it's
no one
way-
would really ever get better if we
Figure out
didn't
what
have
best way
this
to do
sort of
things.
competition.
Innovation.
Right.
Harmentia. You're not going to miss the mark unless you're not aiming for the mark, right? So throughout, especially the New Testament and the Greek cultural worldview that we see, competition is a huge thing. You notice how we really, deflect, devoid, and kind of throw it out of our understanding of the New Testament, but it's like so deeply ingrained. I mean, Paul talks about running the race. Look, he wouldn't be writing about running the race if he wasn't running a race. It's Greek, right? So I think God is into competition, but the purpose of competition, according to God, is what, do you think?
Yeah.
For you to get better, right? And by the way, according to this, look what it says. Overseeing whether any fall behind. In other words, the point of my competition is so that others get better.
This
And-
all reminds me totally of a sparring match, going back to Taekwondo in a tournament that I did, and I don't really like sparring all that much, and I was really pushing myself to do it, something I was not comfortable with. And there was only one other lady black belt, and she was 19 years old, and I'd known her because she used to go to my school, and she left to pursue sparring big time, like she wants to be on the national team, and I'm like, they put us together, I'm like, I'm gonna die, and I said, we were talking to each other beforehand, I'm like, you can win, just like, don't kill me, okay, please just, like, and she's like, oh, you're alright, and I'm like, not like, I was like so worried, and she treated that competition like it was the Olympics, because she wanted to get on to the next round and win that one, that was the last round, and I'm like, she was kicking me in the head, she eventually ended up ending the match by knocking the wind out of me, and I couldn't keep going, and I was like, she didn't need to do this to me, it was like embarrassing and not any fun for me. And then when the master in charge of the tournament had seen who had been put with me, he's like, oh, no, no, no. He like dragged me over to this other place where there was an older like grandma lady. But she didn't have any sparring partner, and I was about the only woman anywhere near her age, and so it was sort of a demonstration match just for her to have a match. And so I, sparred with her, but I didn't obviously go all out. And then one of the judges afterwards, she was telling me, she's like, you weren't really aggressive enough for a black belt or whatever. I'm like, do you see who I am sparring? Like, why would I do that to her? So you gotta have a good mindset that's appropriate for the.
I agree.
Because why would that other, young lady kill me in that match? Right.
Yeah. Well, that's
What
why.
they're talking about is competition with you.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's so important, this thing about overseeing whether any fall behind. So if you have the skills, right, whatever it is you're skilled in, right, your point is not to, it's like your kids, right? When you play games with your kids, you don't want to let them win, right? Don't let your children win. But don't humiliate them to the point that it's like, you're destroyed, right? Because you want them to come back and say, Dad, let's play the game again. Because it's fun to play. And I think sometimes we miss that whole point. As a matter of fact, we miss the whole point of competition when we give everybody a ribbon, even though they weren't first place. Because the whole point of competition is to learn to excel, and you notice, to oversee whether any fall behind. So you're trying to bring others and yourself up to that level. You're aiming for the mark, right? Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if there's also a tie-in through the choice of imagery, if it alludes to the parable of the sower, because it talks about weeds choking out the harvest, and that kind of imagery comes to mind through this verse too. So.
I should have grabbed it, but you remember we had a very similar verse that was up in, I think, 6 or 7, about a similar topic where it was talking about, weeds, and I mentioned that was specifically about fields and other things. So what the authors are doing is, these are agrarian societies, and so they're bringing in they always bring in agrarian stuff. People are close. As a matter of fact, we retained our agrarian roots. I read Victorian era novels and a lot of older novels, and everybody has a garden. Everybody gathers food and takes care of it. Every kid had a part in the garden, and they would grow vegetables as well as flowers and other things. And Tammy has her vegetable garden, and every time she brings stuff in, I'm thinking, well, we're touching roots, right, of human roots to the soil.
These are the verses you're at. Land that drinks in the rain often falling on it and then produces a crop useful to those for whom it is farmed receives the blessing of God, but land that produces thorns and thistles is worthless and is in danger of being cursed. In the end it will be burned. That's in 6.
Yeah. Hey, that was pretty good. I was pretty close, huh? Yeah, and we can't go right back and reparse all those verses, but if you remember, we talked about this. The Greek is concrete. So they mean this to be concrete, okay? They don't mean you're poisoning people intentionally, that's why, but they mean that kind of activity is going to poison any chance of arena or grace. I don't think that he brings in, let's go, there is an allusion, but I want to skip it. Let's go to 16. Go to 18, that's 16. Okay, where's 16? Got it. Dig through my notes here. Get to that. All right, here's one. 16. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. This is pretty interesting. Okay, let's see. And by the way, I want to point out. Okay, is there any discipline in this? Is somebody being disciplined here? Now, we would call it discipline to do self-discipline, right? But that's not what the word in Greek means at all. The word paideia can only be implied, if you like, to be a discipline where it's a forcible discipline by a father against a son or by a person against another person. It doesn't mean, I want to wipe that thought from your mind. It does not mean to discipline, it means to train. So let's see what this says in the Greek. Lest, it's metis, whether any, he's using this metis more than once. Whether any, there be is added, any is, refers to the previous metis. Fornicator, pornos, pornos. Let me mention what a pornos is. I should probably give that as a word of the day, but in the Greek society, okay, when they say pornos, the word specifically means a male prostitute, but in the Greek culture, let's see if we can think about this from a Greek cultural standpoint. There is an expectation of, in their structure, right? You have, let me see how I can put this. Okay. We just talked about competition. We just talked about, you know, within their culture, where they're talking about the, you know, arts, and they talked about the hands. It's all referring back to training. It's all referring back. In our minds and culture, we talk about this is military or physical or athletic training. Remember, they do, in addition to military training and athletic training, they also do intellectual training, you know, what we call education, right? So, what do you think the very worst thing in their culture could be?
Being effeminate.
Not really so much. When we say a male prostitute, I have to give it to you. When we say a male prostitute, we think about a person who takes money for sex. In a Greek cultural worldview, there are male prostitutes who take money for sex. What else could you take money for that would be very offensive to the Greeks? Yeah.
This is, I may be way off in this guess, but would it be like paying somebody to fulfill your military obligation?
That's one of them. Okay, that's getting close to the mark. You're getting close to the mark. How about if you went to a symposium, and at the symposium, okay, at the symposium, I'm going to express an idea, and I say, hey, Dave, you want to, you know, Brett's not here, but I say, hey, Dave, you know, I'm going to express an idea. I give you a couple of denarius, and when I say my idea, you go, hey, that's great, that's really, really smart, that's the most smartest thing I've ever heard. I just paid him what?
It's a bribe.
I bribed him to be intellectually a prostitute. Right? Or how about this? I go to the gymnasium and I say, hey, you know, I'm a little bit off my game. I said, why don't you take a couple of falls for me in the wrestling match right here? You know, I'm gonna, you know, I got a sore back. You know, could you kind of let me? I'll give you a couple of denarii, right? You're throwing a game. That's prostitution. Okay. The word porneros doesn't necessarily mean always sexual within the Greek context. What they're talking about is anyone or anything that would be that where you are prostituting yourself intellectually, physically, or another way. You notice how that fits within the context we're talking about? So let's say, pornos, male prostitute, or profane person. It's or. We don't see that very often. Bebelos, accessible. Profane person is a bebelos, accessible, as in by crossing the doorway. This is an interesting word. As is hos, which how. Esau, who, hos, for, and it's not for, it's anti, opposite. One mina, one or first morsel of meat, bros, it's eating. It's not morsel of meat, it's brosis, eating. Sold, adodinomai, to give away. It's not sold, he gave away his, heto, himself, birthright, protikia. It's the bride is the firstborn. Okay, so here's a literal translation. Whether any male prostitute were accessible, as by crossing the doorway, which how Esau, who opposite first eating to give away himself, primogenitor, right as firstborn. Okay, I'll give you a translation right away, and then we'll talk about this a little bit. Whether any male prostitute or accessible person like Esau, who before first eating gave away his rights as firstborn. Okay, an accessible person. What is an accessible person? A porneros is a male prostitute. It's male, it's not female. So what's an accessible person? You know. Remember in a Greek home, what's back here? Behind doorways. The gynoecium. The gynoecium. Okay? The gynoecium is, and by the way, there are women prostitutes in Greece, but they are considered a pretty high status because they're independent and not under the control of a male. They usually didn't, if they were, that was pretty bad. That was really considered a crime. But in the Greek home, the women were protected and kept in the gynoecium for lots of reasons in their culture. Okay? I'm not going to try to defend their culture. We would say that's not a very happy culture, but that's the way all Oriental cultures are. So, if I leave the doors open, right? If I have a guest in the house and I leave the doors to the gynoecium open. Or how about this? We know from Judges and from Ruth. If I leave a woman out in the fields alone, right? We've talked about that. They are now an accessible person. So the author is trying to express culturally both the extent of male prostitution, a male prostitute himself, both sexually or in other ways, right, in their culture, and also a woman. However, the point about a woman is what? Who makes her accessible?
Whoever
That
lets
would
the
be
door.
guardian, I suppose.
Yeah, well, her husband, her father, whoever is responsible for her. And so, we don't get this culturally, right? We say, what is an accessible person? What does this mean? But culturally, it's a very important point. There also is the other point of this we can take in the modern sense. What's an accessible person? Within if I talk about porneros as a person who prostitutes,
Like an easy person.
yeah. So, someone who makes themselves accessible to it. So, there's no way that I would go to someone and try to bribe them if I knew they weren't bribable. You see what I'm saying? I go to a person who is accessible and I know is kind of slippery, right? You don't go to the upright in your community and say, hey, here's a bribe, let me win at golf, right? That's not the way it works. You go to the slippery guy who, who's known to cheat at golf. So there's a lot in this little point. But whether any male prostitute accessible person like Esau, who before first eating gave away his rights as firstborn. What did Esau do in the Greek cultural sense?
Prostituted.
He prostituted himself. He sold his birthright for food. The Greeks would say, what do you think the Greeks would say about that?
Dumbest person ever.
Yeah, well, in the Hebrew culture, by the way, in the Hebrew culture, Esau is not really, there's a lot in this culture, okay? Like, for example, was Jacob a good guy or a bad guy? He was not a good guy. Going to your brother and bribing, okay,
Right.
guess what? He became an accessible person. He was one who prostituted his brother by basically bribing him, right? I mean, this is not good. And Hebrew culture and other cultures, you wonder how this stuff got into the records, because it's history, by the way. But the reason it's recorded isn't because it's goodness. God's not saying do this. It is not good. In the Greek worldview, Esau is worse because he gave into his desires, right? He made him, yes, go ahead.
I hate to chase a rabbit, but I've always thought Esau, in this situation, he probably didn't really mean to give away his birthright.
No, he didn't.
I
It
thought
was
so
kind of
too.
like, fix me a meal, and he says, okay, I'll get you a meal for your birthright. And he goes, oh, yeah, of course. You know, and it was kind of like, yeah, you can't be serious. And that's the way I've always kind of taken this.
Well, if my brother had done that to me, I'd been the same way. Come on, give me a Coke. What's wrong with you, you know?
Yeah.
Are you crazy, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll do it.
Sure, you know, the Greeks see irony everywhere, but, you know, you can see why the Greeks can't forgive Esau. And as a matter of fact, you know, the Greeks would be happy with Jacob. You know why, right? Diakasune. Because Jacob used his wit to cause his brother to give him what he wanted. He tricked him. A lot of cultures, matter of fact, we have that in our culture. The Anglo-Saxon culture, it's only come up recently because people like to make, you know, heroes of these gods you see on TV that are supposed to be superheroes. But one of them is called Loki. And Loki is the trickster god of the Norwegians. And there is a similar god and goddess in Anglo-Saxon culture. The Greeks had one too. You remember who he was? The god of thieves, the god of trickiness. The one who spoke for the gods? Mercury. In Greek, it's a Mercury in Greek. Who's in
Mercury was
Hermes.
Greek, was Roman, I think.
Mercury's Roman. Who's it in Greek?
Hermes.
Hermes. He's a god. He's not. They picture him on a ball. It's not the earth. He's balancing on the ball because he's got bad and good. And the Greeks would say, you know, tricking people. They love practical jokes. We don't get much of that, you know, in our culture because they don't talk about it much. But the Greeks were that kind of culture. And so, anyway, let's see. I've got everything here that I had some notes on.
But didn't we were just saying how it would be really offensive if you kind of tricked people by having someone be in league with you to kind of make things look different than they really are, or, you know, sort of underhanded.
Well, you remember, if I went to Dave and I used a logos and convinced Dave to throw the game of golf, or if I trash talked him so bad that he couldn't continue to play, he was like, oh, I can't even make a putt, right? The Greeks would say, that's good. On the other hand, if I take money and I pay him, or if I use a logical argument, that's cool. I'm cool.
So it's like morality versus not very reasonable thinking or something like that. Like in one situation, you're trying to appeal to their less moral side, you know, their baser instincts, and the other one you're just trying to put one over on them.
If I am tricking you, the Greeks would say that if I'm tricking you, that's one thing. On the other hand, if I'm bribing you or exchanging something with you, they would say something totally different. And a lot of it comes from the class of their society. You probably don't read. I read way too many Victorian era novels. Okay, in a Victorian era novel, people, even some classes, did not carry their own money. They thought it was immoral or unethical for them to touch money. And if you were a person like even getting a job, right? If you were in a certain class, you got a job and they paid you for it.
Oh, that's so scandalous.
Yeah. We don't have that feel. But in the Greek, remember the Greeks? All the Greeks we're talking about are wealthy. They're free men. I write in my novels about middle-class Greeks, but there's not a huge middle class in Greece. It's pretty much, you know, an upper-class group that don't work. They protect their city. They're militarily trained. You know, they do stuff, but they don't go to a 9-to-5 job like we would consider a standard job. They're not doing what we would consider the standard kind of work. We get into more details, but.
Well, I remember in Japan, they don't even take money at the register, like, you do not hand money to a person.
Right, you don't
lay
touch
down-
it.
You lay it down in a little tray that they have, even at the 7-Eleven, doesn't matter what store, you never hand money to a person, and they always put your change in another tray and hand it back to you.
Right.
You don't.
Well, you don't want to touch the other person's hands, but
Right.
yeah, well, and when you're in Oriental cultures, you never hand something with a single hand. You always do it with two hands. You know why, right? Historically?
You're not gonna
Yeah.
get
If
it.
I had a
Yeah,
sword
we
by
know
my
you're
back,
not
I could
gonna-
hand you something to whack you, right?
Yeah.
So that you do two hands when you approach someone, so they know that you're not armed. You know, it's kind of like we do our, well, this always seemed kind of dangerous to me, but we'd use right hands. But if you have a left-handed guy with a sword, you could be in bad shape, right? You're shaking hands to make sure maybe you should have a thing where you hold your hand up like this, you know, so you know that their hands are clear. Anyway, so in 70 it says, afterwards, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. Here's the Greek. Gar, assigning a reason. Esemi, to know. How that, hote, that or because, afterwards, metapita, thereafter, when he would, thelo, to determine, it's not when he would, it's to determine, have inherited, klernomai, to become heir to, the blessing, eulogia, fine speaking. He was rejected, apodozikiomai, whatever, to disapprove. For Gar signing a reason, he found, to find, oh no. All right, well, I want to get to 18 because 18 is one of the screwiest verses you're ever going to see, especially in its translation. So if you haven't read ahead, look at 18. I think I gave it to you. Read it in the NIV and ask yourself the question. It's kind of like the one we had before, and you read it and you go, huh? There is a really strong reason for that verse, and that verse is very important. There's something going on, but that's what you got to ask yourself. What's going on? We'll look at that specifically. Remember, it's all about training. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look out just this your week. In your name we pray. Amen.
For your videos and stuff, you need to be done.
I got to post my videos. I've been